I always thought temptation would come with warning signs. A certain look. A moment you could feel creeping in. Something obvious. But when it actually came for me, it didn't knock. It slipped in quietly, disguised as a compliment, a glance that lingered too long, a voice that said the one thing I hadn't heard in years. And it came from the one man I should have never looked at that way, my husband's best friend. It started on a Thursday. One of those ordinary, forgettable days. The house smelled like detergent and coffee. I was folding laundry in the living room, the TV murmuring in the background, when I heard the door open. "Hey, it's me," came that familiar voice. Of course it was him. Dylan, my husband's best friend of over 20 years. He had a key to our house, a permanent seat at our dinner table, and an ease with me that sometimes felt too easy. "Kitchen," I called out, not bothering to turn around. He walked in, carrying a cardboard box. "For Mark," he said. "Left some tools in my garage." I nodded. He's still at work. Dylan leaned against the counter, watching me. I felt it, noticed how long his eyes stayed on me, how they moved. He had that kind of gaze that made you aware of yourself. "I like your hair like that," he said casually. I paused. "Like what?" He shrugged, smiling. "Just softer." "I don't know. It suits you." It was nothing. It should have been nothing. But it wasn't. Because Mark hadn't said anything about my hair in months. I forced a smile. "Thanks." I expected him to leave then. But he didn't. He walked over to the table, sat down like it was his home too, and started talking about football or a new grill or something else I wasn't really listening to. I was too busy noticing the way he looked at me, like he was searching for cracks. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that look, that tone in his voice, about how wrong it felt, and how alive I felt. I didn't want it to mean anything, but the truth is, I hadn't felt wanted in so long. Not really. Mark loved me, I knew that. But love can become a habit. A rhythm you forget you're dancing to. The next time Dylan came over, it was Saturday. Mark was outside washing the car. I was inside making lemonade. Dylan stepped into the kitchen and leaned in too close when he asked where we kept the sugar. His hand brushed mine. "Just a second. Just enough." I pulled away. "It's in the cabinet." He didn't move. "You smell good," he said. "Dylan." "I mean it," he said. "You always have. But today, it's different." I stared at him. My pulse quickened. The room felt smaller. Warmer. "You shouldn't say things like that." He smiled. "Why not?" "It's true." Then he walked out like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just set something on fire inside me. I didn't tell Mark. I couldn't. I told myself it was harmless. That Dylan was just being playful. That I was imagining it. But I wasn't. Because the next week, it happened again. And again. Little things. Compliments. Glances. A casual touch to my shoulder that lingered. One afternoon, he came by while Mark was in the shower. I was in the kitchen, barefoot, wearing one of those dresses I used to wear before life became just bills and schedules. "You wear that for him?" Dylan asked. I turned to him. "What?" He stepped closer. "That dress. You wear it for Mark." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because in that moment, I realized I didn't know. He smiled, but it wasn't innocent. "You used to smile more," he said. "Used to laugh. Now you walk around like someone pressed pause on you." It hit me like a slap. Because he was right. I had become muted, routine, predictable. "Maybe I just grew up," I said quietly. "No," he replied. "You gave up." And then he said it, the thing that broke something open inside me. "If I were him, I wouldn't let you forget who you are." That night, I stared at myself in the mirror for an hour, noticing every line, every soft curve, every part of me that had gone unseen. And I wondered, when did I stop being a woman and start being just his wife? I shouldn't have seen Dylan again. But I did, because something had been unlocked. Something I didn't want to admit was even still inside me. The night it finally happened, Mark had left for a weekend conference. Dylan offered to come over and help me fix a leaky faucet. I said yes. He didn't bring any tools. We stood in the kitchen. Too close. Too quiet. I lied, he said softly. I didn't come for the sink. I didn't move. Then why did you come? He stepped closer. Because you keep pretending you don't feel it too. His hand reached for mine. And this time, I didn't pull away. My breath caught. My heart screamed at me to stop. But I didn't. Because for the first time in years, I felt seen. Desired. Awake. He leaned in. Slowly. Deliberately. And I let him. The moment our lips met, the silence in the kitchen fractured into a million sharp pieces. I didn't know if it was the thrill, the guilt, or something far more dangerous that made my heart race, but I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I kissed him back. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts, only the heat of a need I hadn't acknowledged in years. It wasn't about love. It wasn't even about Dylan. It was about feeling again. About remembering that I wasn't invisible. The kiss didn't last long. A few seconds, maybe less. But when I pulled away, breathless, shaken, and horrified, I saw it in his eyes. That look. Not of conquest, but of recognition. He knew what he'd just awakened. I shouldn't have done that, I whispered. I think you should have done it a long time ago, he replied. The room felt hot, the air too thick to breathe. I stepped back, brushing past him, needing space, clarity, anything. I'm married, I said. To your best friend. You think I forgot that? Dylan's voice was low, but not angry. I know exactly who you are, but I also know what I see. And I see a woman who's been walking around like she's half alive. I didn't ask for this, I snapped. No, he said. But you didn't stop it either. He left after that. Quietly. No dramatics. No promises. Just the weight of what had happened filling the space between us like smoke. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in bed, Mark's side still cold from his absence. My body buzzed with guilt, but beneath it, there was something else. An ache. A realization. I missed being wanted. Not just in a passing, obligatory way, but really, truly desired. Dylan had looked at me like I was still worth stopping for. The next morning, I avoided my reflection. I couldn't look myself in the eye. I made coffee, walked around the house, answered texts, and all the while, his words echoed in my head. If I were him, I wouldn't let you forget who you are. Mark came home Sunday evening, tired, distracted. I greeted him with a kiss on the cheek, and he smiled, asked about dinner, and turned on the game. Like nothing had happened. Like nothing ever did. I sat across from him at the table, watching him chew, nod, mumble about some supplier issue at work. And I wondered, when did we stop seeing each other? When did I become background noise? Everything okay? He asked, catching my stare. Fine, I lied. He nodded and went back to his plate. I didn't see Dylan for a week. I thought maybe it was over. A moment of weakness, an impulse that would pass. I could forget it, bury it, pretend nothing happened. But then, Thursday came. He showed up at the front door with a toolbox. I came to fix the faucet, he said, like nothing had changed. I stood frozen for a moment, then stepped aside. He worked in silence. I hovered in the living room, pretending to scroll my phone, heart pounding with every sound of metal on porcelain. When he finally stood and wiped his hands, he didn't move to leave. I meant what I said, he said. That kiss wasn't a mistake. You were alive in that moment. I saw it. I can't, I said, more to myself than to him. I won't destroy what's left. He nodded slowly. Then why haven't you told him? I didn't have an answer. Because, he continued, a part of you doesn't want it to end. He walked out without waiting for a response. And I hated him for being right. A few nights later, Mark and I had dinner with friends. Dylan was there. Of course he was. Laughing, drinking, throwing glances at me when no one was looking. And I felt it all again. The tension. The electricity. The reminder that my life was a routine, and he was a disruption I hadn't realized I craved. After dinner, I offered to drive Mark's tipsy coworker home. Mark kissed me on the cheek and handed me the keys. I left the party early, but I didn't take her home. I parked 2 blocks away and sat in silence. I thought of everything, the years with Mark, the history, the promises. And I thought of Dylan. The fire he lit in me, the way he saw through the version of myself I had carefully maintained for so long. My phone buzzed. "Dylan, still up?" I didn't respond. I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the screen. Then I turned off the engine, and I drove to his house. When he opened the door, neither of us said a word. He stepped aside. I walked in. We stood there, seconds ticking by like thunder in my chest. "I thought you weren't coming," he said. "I shouldn't be here," I replied. "But you are." His hand reached for mine again, just like before. Only this time, I didn't hesitate. I let him. And everything else, the lies, the vows, the guilt, faded. For one night, I let myself be someone else. Someone who wasn't invisible. Someone who was seen, touched, wanted. Someone alive. The next morning, the sunlight hit me like a confession. I dressed in silence. He didn't try to stop me. "Are you okay?" he asked. "No," I said, "but I will be." He nodded. I left without looking back. When I got home, Mark was still asleep. I climbed into bed beside him, my heart heavy with 1,000 things I couldn't say. He turned toward me in his sleep and draped his arm across my waist like he used to. And I wondered, would he ever know? Would he see the shift in my eyes, the hesitation in my voice? Or would we just keep going like nothing happened? Because sometimes the worst betrayals are the ones you never confess. And sometimes the most alive you've ever felt is the moment you lost who you were.